My name is Amelia Brooks. I am 39 years old, a textile conservator and archival collections specialist in Savannah, Georgia. And at 7:25 on a Thursday night, I walked into the Savannah Heritage Museum fundraiser and saw my dead mother's quilts hanging under my half-brother's name. The donor hall was all polished wood, champagne glasses, soft gold lights, and women in silk scarves pretending history was safer behind velvet ropes. 9 quilts hung along the east wall in climate cases I had never approved, each one labeled the Brooks Family Donation, courtesy of Tyler and Madison Brooks. My mother's wedding ring quilt, her blue sawtooth star, the red and cream church picnic quilt with the coffee stain she used to say proved it had lived a good life. Every description on the little white museum labels had been copied from my conservation notes, right down to the phrase, uneven border tension from hand piecing after chemotherapy. Tyler stood on the stage beside a portrait of my mother, smiling like he had saved her memory from a fire. His wife, Madison, stood near the museum board members, one hand on her necklace, already practicing the posture of a woman who expected a board seat by morning. My stepmother Karen held the microphone and said, "Amelia locked these quilts away for years, but Tyler had the heart to bring his mother's legacy back to the public." His mother. The room clapped. My father Grant looked down at his program. I sat near the back under a paper place card that said, "Family Guest," with no mention that the quilts were mine, the storage contract was mine, the restoration invoices were mine, and the small brass key to my mother's cedar quilt chest was in my palm. The key was tied to a faded blue ribbon my mother had sewn onto it the summer before she died. In my tote was a cream archival folder holding her notarized gift letter, 11 years of storage receipts, 17 restoration invoices, provenance cards, insurance papers, museum emails, and the forged donation deed the curator had accidentally emailed me that morning for expert review. I did not stand up right away. I did not cry. I pressed the brass key into my skin and looked at the curator, Dr. Celeste Warren, who was reading something on her tablet with a face that had gone very still. Before I tell you what happened when she asked who signed the donation deed and Madison went pale, tell me this first. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before my family understands that every stitch remembers whose hands protected it. My mother's name was Ruth Brooks, and the first thing people always noticed about her was not the cancer scarf, the thin wrists, or the oxygen machine that came later. It was her hands. Her fingers were bent from arthritis, pricked from needles, and stained with years of fabric dye and peach jam, but they moved with a patience that could make scraps turn into order. She taught me quilting at the kitchen table when I was 8, and she taught me preservation without using that word. Wash your hands. Never fold on the same crease twice. Do not hang old cotton in direct sun. Write down who made it before someone with a louder voice claims it later. Tyler was not born yet when she taught me most of that. He was my father's second family child, born after Dad married Karen when I was 14. Tyler was treated like proof that Dad had gotten a fresh start. I was treated like a reminder that the first family had included sickness, debt, and a woman they all preferred to remember only when it made them look tender. In our house, Tyler's curiosity was celebrated. Mine was corrected. When Tyler touched one of Mom's quilt blocks with sticky fingers, Karen said he was connecting with family history. When I asked him to wash his hands first, Dad said I was acting like a museum guard. When Tyler forgot Mom's birthday at 16, Karen said grief was hard for boys. When I spent 2 weekends scanning Mom's recipes and sewing notes so mold would not take them from the garage, Karen said I was clinging to sad things. Tyler could visit Mom's grave once a year, pose with flowers, and be praised as a devoted son. I could pay for climate-controlled storage, repair fabric tears under a magnifier, and be called cold because I did not cry where people could photograph it. That was the first family pattern. Tyler got the symbol. I got the responsibility. Tyler got memory when it had lights on it. I got memory when it needed invoices. The quilts became mine because my mother made that decision before anyone else knew she was dying as quickly as she was. She signed a notarized gift letter at the kitchen table with a hospice social worker and my grandmother's old friend as witnesses. I can still see the cup of weak tea beside her elbow, the cedar chest open near the wall, the brass key on the faded blue ribbon. "These go to Amelia," she said. "Not because she loves me more, because she knows what love costs after the funeral." I was 28 and too young to understand how many people would hear that sentence as an accusation. Dad stood in the doorway while she said it. He did not object. He did not defend it later either. That was my father's specialty. He could witness the truth privately and let it be murdered publicly if peace was easier. Mom died on a rainy Monday in June. At the funeral reception, Karen told people Ruth would have wanted all of us to share her quilts. I stood beside the dessert table with the brass key in my pocket and said nothing, because my mother's body had been in the ground for less than 2 hours, and I still believed silence was dignity. Silence becomes dangerous when liars interpret it as space. For 11 years, I protected that quilt collection. I moved it from the garage before a humid summer could destroy the cotton. I paid for climate-controlled storage at a facility near Thunderbolt. I had 17 quilts assessed, stabilized, lightly cleaned, and sleeved properly by a textile lab. I photographed every block front and back. I digitized 146 family photos, so the provenance cards had faces, dates, church names, county fairs, wedding years, birth announcements, and the plain little truths that turn fabric into history. I insured the collection when my consulting work finally paid enough. I rejected 3 display requests because the lighting was wrong, the cases were not sealed, or the loan terms gave the borrowing group too much handling access. Karen called that hoarding. Tyler called it gatekeeping. Dad called it grief getting complicated. My mother would have called it care. I became a textile conservator because of Mom, but also because I wanted a world where fragile things were not asked to survive careless people without support. My work was not romantic. It was cotton gloves, pH-neutral boxes, pest logs, humidity charts, donor agreements, accession numbers, condition reports, and telling wealthy families no when they wanted to hang 120-year-old fabric above a fireplace. I specialized in heirloom preservation and provenance records, which meant I knew how often families lied about objects after the person who knew the truth died. A daughter lost a letter her brother sold online. A widower donated a dress his wife had promised to her niece. A cousin claimed a Bible because his last name matched the cover, though the notes inside belonged to someone else. Paperwork did not cheapen memory. It defended memory after charm entered the room with clean hands. That was what Karen never forgave me for. Madison married Tyler when he was 30, and brought with her the ambition of someone who understood small-town history could be converted into status if staged correctly. Madison wanted more. The museum fundraiser appeared first as a rumor. A client sent me a screenshot from Savannah Heritage Museum's donor newsletter. Upcoming Brooks Family Quilt Collection Preview, honoring Ruth Brooks and the family who brought her work home. My breath stopped. Brought her work home. I called the storage facility. The manager said Tyler had accessed the unit 2 weeks earlier with a notarized family authorization and a temporary release form. My name was on the account. I had not signed anything. A theft with a notary stamp still smells like theft when you know the drawer it came from. I drove to the facility that afternoon and found the cedar chest gone from its climate locker. The empty space looked obscene. A few cotton ties lay on the metal shelf, left behind like shed skin. The manager showed me the scanned release, Tyler's name, Madison's email. A signature that looked like mine if someone copied it from an old loan inquiry I had sent a community gallery 5 years earlier. The loop on the A was wrong. The pressure was wrong. The date was impossible because I had been in Charleston at a conference that day giving a lecture on fraudulent provenance claims. The next morning, Dr. Celeste Warren emailed me by mistake. She was the museum curator handling the fundraiser, and my name appeared in the original provenance file Tyler had submitted, though Madison had apparently told her I was an emotional former holder who had released the collection to the broader family. Celeste attached the final donation deed for expert review, asking whether the descriptions matched my prior notes. My prior notes. I opened the file and saw my conservation language copied line for line, then saw the deed page with a signature claiming I donated the collection permanently to the museum through Tyler and Madison Brooks. Under donor authority, someone had written family representative. No, that phrase is where ownership goes to die. I did not call Tyler. I did not call Karen. I called Celeste. Her voice changed as soon as I said I had never signed a donation deed. Not disbelief. Professional alarm. She asked if I owned the collection. I said yes, and I could prove it. She asked if I would still attend the fundraiser. I said, apparently I am already part of the program. She went quiet, then said, bring the original documents. That was the second neutral sentence in 2 days that kept me from shaking apart. A good curator does not rescue you. A good curator asks for provenance and preserves the file. Before I left for the fundraiser, I packed the cream archival folder, the notarized gift letter, the cedar chest key, storage payment records for 11 years, restoration invoices for 17 quilts, insurance policy, provenance metadata, museum loan emails where I had declined unsafe displays, the copied catalog notes, the storage release, the forged donation deed, a photograph of Mom's hand holding the blue sawtooth quilt the last winter she was alive. Madison caught me at the museum entrance before the donor presentation. She wore a pale green dress and a pearl pin shaped like a needle, as if costume could become lineage. Amelia, she said warmly, too warmly, we are so glad you came. In her hand was a stack of cream cards tied with blue ribbon. Under the top card, folded once, was a retroactive donation release naming Tyler and Madison as authorized family donors and asking me to confirm I had emotionally and legally released any claim. The signature line was highlighted. Some people think fraud becomes gentler when it is tied with ribbon. I looked at Madison. This is not a memory card. Her smile stayed still, but her eyes hardened. It is just to prevent confusion. Confusion is what you built. She leaned closer. Do not embarrass your father in front of donors. There it was. Not do not steal. Not do not lie. Do not embarrass. In my family, image was always the patient on the table. Tyler appeared behind her, smelling like expensive cologne and nervous sweat. Amelia, please, tonight is about Mom. He had not called her Mom in years unless someone could hear it. I said, then why is your wife's name on the donor wall? He glanced toward the hall. We made this happen. You removed it from storage. You were just letting it sit there. I was preserving it. He laughed softly. You always make grief sound like a job. I looked through the glass doors at the quilts under museum lights. You made it a fundraiser. His mouth tightened. Karen joined us with Dad behind her. Dad looked at the folder in my hand and aged 5 years. Karen said, be generous for once. I held up the folded release. You first. The labels were elegant and stolen. Ruth Brooks, 1948-2013. Wedding ring quilt, cotton scraps from Brooks family garments. Preserved through the dedication of Tyler and Madison Brooks. I stared at dedication until it blurred. My storage receipts had more dedication than their marriage certificate. Nora Brooks, Tyler's 9-year-old daughter, stood near the blue sawtooth star quilt with her nose almost to the glass. She had Mom's eyes, though she had never met her. "Aunt Amelia," she whispered when she saw me. "Dad said Grandma Ruth left these for everyone." Tyler had not even given the child a clean lie. He had given her a future confusion. I knelt beside her. She wanted them protected. Nora touched the blue ribbon on my key. "Is that from the chest?" I nodded. Her face lit up. "Dad said the chest was lost." I looked over her shoulder at Tyler. He looked away. Children do not create family myths. They inherit them with missing pages. The program started with a donor welcome, a string trio, and Madison introducing the campaign. $75,000 for textile education, community preservation, and a Brooks family quilt study room. I believed in every goal except the theft holding it up. Madison spoke about women's work, domestic art, and memory. She said heirlooms belong in the light. I wondered whether she had learned that sentence from a museum pamphlet or from my loan denial notes. Then Karen took the microphone and delivered the quote that opened this story. "Amelia locked these quilts away. Tyler had the heart." The room clapped. Tyler smiled at me from the stage. Not with triumph exactly, with relief. The lie had reached the microphone. I waited until Celeste walked to the podium for the acquisition statement. Her tablet was in her hand, but she did not begin reading. She looked first at the quilts, then at me, then at Tyler. "Before we proceed with donor acknowledgements," she said, "I need to confirm provenance authority for the Brooks quilt collection." The room shifted before it understood why. Museum donors understand polite trouble. They leaned forward with small movements. Madison's hand moved to her necklace. Tyler's smile thinned. Karen turned toward Dad. Celeste continued. "The donation deed submitted to the museum lists Tyler and Madison Brooks as family representatives. However, the original provenance file identifies Amelia Brooks as owner and conservator. Who signed the donation deed?" The question sat in the room like a needle held over fabric. Madison went pale. Tyler stepped forward. "This is a family collection." Celeste said, "That is not the question." I stood from the back. My chair made a quiet scrape. Every head turned. I walked toward the front with the cream folder and the brass key in my hand. I did not rush. Rushing makes liars look chaste. I placed the folder on a small display table beside the red and cream church picnic quilt. I did not sign the deed. Karen said, "Amelia, not here." I looked at the donors. "Here is where my mother's quilts are hanging." That was the first room shift. People stopped pretending this was a scheduling issue. Tyler said, "She abandoned them in storage for over a decade." There it was, the public lie. I opened the folder and placed the climate-controlled storage contract on the table. 11 years of paid storage. Then the receipts. Every month. Then the restoration invoices. 17 quilts stabilized. Then the insurance policy. Annual coverage. Then the loan denial letters. 3 unsafe display requests rejected. Celeste picked up the first invoice and looked at the date. A textile historian near the front lowered her program. Madison said, "That does not mean ownership." I placed the notarized gift letter beside the invoices. My mother's signature. Witnesses. Date. These quilts go to Amelia Brooks. Celeste read it silently, then aloud only enough for the board members nearest her to hear. Karen whispered, "Ruth was sick when she signed that." I said, "Hospice did not make her confused. It made her careful." Dad closed his eyes. The first proof slap landed against my stepmother's favorite lie. Tyler tried to recover. "Dad is her husband. He has rights to family property." Celeste looked at Dad. "Grant Brooks, Did the quilts enter Ruth Brooks's estate after this gift letter? Dad's mouth opened. Karen stared at him with warning in her face. He looked at me, then at the blue ribbon key, then at Ruth's portrait on the screen. No, he said. One small word. A decade late. Still enough to move air. Karen hissed, "Grant!" He did not look at her. The room heard him. So did Nora, standing near the wall with both hands around her program. Madison stepped in with a soft voice. Amelia may have cared for the quilts, but she had emotionally released them. We were only trying to share Ruth's work. I removed the forged donation deed from the folder and placed it beside the gift letter. Then why did you forge a legal release? Madison's face tightened. That is not fair. Celeste picked up the deed. This signature does not match the gift letter signature or Amelia's museum correspondence. She tapped her tablet. And the metadata on the deed file shows it was submitted from Madison Brooks's email account. Madison looked at Tyler. Tyler said, "We relied on family understanding." I said, "No, you relied on my silence." A donor in the second row stopped taking notes. That was the second proof slap, and it came with metadata. Karen moved toward me, voice low enough to sound maternal if you did not know her. Your mother would be ashamed of you making grief ugly. I took out Mom's index card and held it between two fingers. Every stitch remembers. My mother wrote this on the card inside the cedar chest. I held up the brass key tied with blue ribbon. This opened the chest where she kept them. Tyler told his daughter it was lost. Nora looked at her father. Dad? Tyler's face broke open for half a second. Not with guilt for me, with panic that the child had heard. I turned toward Nora before anyone else could use her. None of this is your fault. Celeste quietly signaled a staff member, and the woman led Nora to a side bench near the education table, close enough to feel safe, far enough not to be turned into a shield. That was a room shift, too. A child was removed from the lie, not from the truth. A board member with silver hair asked, "Dr. Warren, can the museum accept this collection tonight?" Celeste looked at the documents. Not under this deed. Madison's lips parted. Tyler said, "What about the campaign?" Celeste said, "The campaign can continue only after ownership is verified and lawful consent is obtained." Tyler turned toward me then. There it was. The reflex every golden child eventually reveals. When praise fails, find the person who has always fixed things. Amelia, he said, softer now. We can do this together. I looked at the stolen labels on the wall. You already chose together. You left me off the label. He said, do not punish Mom's legacy. I am protecting it from you. The third proof came from the labels themselves. I opened my provenance cards and held one beside the museum label for the wedding ring quilt. Same wording, same date, same note about the sleeve replacement I had paid for in 2018. Same typo in the county fair name from my original draft, corrected later in my own archive, but copied before correction into Madison's submission. I pointed to it. They did not even steal the updated version. A murmur moved through the textile historians. It was small, almost funny, but it was devastating. People who work with archives know a copied typo is a fingerprint. Celeste enlarged the label file on her tablet and compared it with my provenance card. This description appears to come from Amelia's catalog record. A historian said, the typo confirms it. Madison looked like she might be sick. The room had moved from emotion to evidence, and evidence was less forgiving. Dad finally stood. He did not come to me. He faced the donors. Ruth gave them to Amelia, he said. His voice shook. She asked me not to interfere. Karen stared at him as if he had changed languages. He continued. Amelia paid for the storage. She repaired them. Tyler did not. Tyler's mouth tightened. For a moment, I saw the boy who had been trained to believe love meant never being contradicted. Then I saw the man who had taken a cedar chest from storage and submitted a forged deed. Both were true. Only one was legally relevant. Celeste announced the donation would be frozen. The deed would be reviewed by Museum Council. Donor pledges tied specifically to the Brooks collection would be held pending correction, and the display labels would be removed until ownership and credit were resolved. She said it in smooth museum language, but it hit like a door locking. Madison's board nomination, scheduled for the next morning, did not survive that sentence. Everyone knew it before anyone said it. A museum board does not reward someone whose first major donation arrives on forged paperwork. Karen began crying then, but the donors did not move toward her. Tears lose gravity when documents are heavier. Tyler approached me after Celeste stepped down. You are destroying the only thing I did for her. I looked at the quilts. You did not do it for her. You do not know that. You put Madison's name on the donor wall. He flinched. She helped. She forged. He said I was selfish. I said, selfish people do not pay storage for 11 years. He said the quilts were wasted with me. I said, they were intact with me. That line stopped him. Not because he agreed, because intact was the one word he could not fake. The side archive room became the second truth room. Celeste asked me, Tyler, Madison, Dad, Karen, and 2 board members to step inside to document the dispute. The room smelled like clean paper and cotton gloves. There were flat files, padded tables, a humidity monitor, and a sign that said, no food or drink near collections. Rules. Beautiful rules. The kind that protected what families called old blankets. Celeste laid the documents in order. Gift letter, storage receipts, restoration invoices, insurance policy, forged deed, copied label files, email chain. Then she asked Madison, who prepared the donation deed? Madison said Tyler provided the information. Tyler said Madison handled the museum communication. Karen said Amelia had been impossible for years. Celeste said, that was not my question. I loved archivists for that. They knew the power of exact wording. Madison finally admitted she created the deed from a template after Tyler assured her the family owned the collection. Tyler said Dad had implied it. Dad said nothing. Karen said Ruth would have wanted everyone included. Celeste asked, did anyone ask Amelia? No one answered. The silence lined up like empty spools. Then Celeste asked the direct question that ended the last fog. Did Amelia Brooks sign any donation authorization? Madison whispered, no. There it was. Not enough to heal, enough to record. A board member wrote it down. My attorney was not there, but the file had begun protecting itself. While we were still in the archive room, a museum staff member brought in Nora's little purse. Inside was a folded museum activity sheet where she had written, Great-Grandma Ruth made these. Aunt Amelia saved them. The staff member said Nora asked if I could have it. I almost lost my composure then, not because a child's note fixed anything, but because she had understood the difference faster than the adults who benefited from blurring it. I folded it carefully and placed it in the cream folder beside Mom's index card. 2 small pieces of paper, one from the woman who made the stitches, one from the child who had almost inherited the lie. That was the thread I cared about. By 9 o'clock, the fundraiser had changed shape. The museum did not cancel the entire evening, but the Brooks donation became a pending provenance review. The quilts remained protected in their cases, but the donor labels were removed by white-gloved staff while people watched. That image stayed with me. Small white cards being lifted away from the glass. Tyler and Madison's names disappearing one label at a time. Karen stood near the doorway, crying into a napkin. Dad stood alone under Mom's portrait. Tyler talked to a real estate client who kept glancing toward the archive room. Madison deleted posts from her phone so quickly her thumb looked frantic. Deletion is not disappearance. I had screenshots. So did half the donors who had come for a heritage moment and gotten a provenance lesson. The next morning, the consequences arrived with clean subject lines. Savannah Heritage Museum placed Madison's board nomination on indefinite hold. Donors who had pledged specifically to the Brooks family quilt study room asked for clarification. The storage facility manager sent an apology and confirmation that the release procedure had failed because the forged deed had been accepted without direct account holder verification. My insurance company asked for a police report number before adjusting coverage status. Tyler called me 7 times. Karen called 12. Dad called once. I answered Dad. He said, "I should have stopped it." I said, "Yes." He waited for comfort. I did not give it. He said, "Karen wanted the family included." "Mom already included me," I said. "She gave me the quilts." He cried softly. It was real. It was late. Both things can be true. Tyler's apology came through text, which told me it was not ready to be one. He wrote that he never meant to hurt me, that Madison got carried away, that the museum made everything too formal, that he only wanted Ruth remembered. I replied with a photograph of the storage locker after the cedar chest was removed. Empty shelf. Cotton ties left behind. This is what your remembering looked like. He did not answer for 2 days. Then he wrote, "Nora is asking questions." I wrote back, "Good. Answer them without lying." That was the harshest mercy I could offer. Karen tried social shame first. She posted a picture of the quilts with a caption about people who put ownership above legacy. Within an hour, a textile historian who had attended the fundraiser commented, "Provenance is how legacy survives." Karen deleted the post. Then she called me cruel. I said, "No, I am documented." She hated that. People who live through pressure hate records because records do not get tired at midnight. She said I had always resented Tyler. I said I resented theft. She said Ruth would want generosity. I said Ruth signed a gift letter because she knew generosity without boundaries becomes plunder. Karen hung up before I could finish. That was fine. The folder had heard me. The museum review took 6 weeks. During that time, the quilts stayed in museum conservation storage, under a temporary protective hold, not accessioned, not displayed as Tyler's donation, not moved without my written consent. Celeste kept me updated with more care than my family ever had. She apologized for the institution's failure to verify authority before the fundraiser. I accepted the apology because it came with corrective action. New donor deed verification policy. Owner confirmation calls. Required provenance review for family heirloom transfers. No family representative language without legal basis. That mattered. Mistakes become accountability only when procedures change. At the end of the review, I did not take the quilts home and hide them away forever. That is what my family expected because it made their story easier. Instead, I negotiated a proper limited museum loan under my name and Ruth Brooks's name, with correct labels, approved lighting, handling limits, insurance requirements, no permanent donation, and an education panel about women's textile labor, provenance, and family ownership disputes. The label for the blue sawtooth star quilt read, "Made by Ruth Brooks, preserved by Amelia Brooks, loaned with permission from the Ruth Brooks Quilt Collection." The first time I saw that label, I had to sit down. Not because it was flashy, because it was accurate. Accuracy can feel like tenderness after years of performance. Dad came to see the corrected exhibit 2 months later. He stood in front of the wedding ring quilt for a long time. Karen did not come. Tyler did not either. Nora came with Dad, holding a little notebook. She read every label, then asked if she could learn to sew. I looked at Dad. He nodded, but this time he did not speak for me. I told Nora yes, with clean hands, good light, and no food near the fabric. She grinned. Later, at my kitchen table, I gave her a scrap of blue cotton from a modern practice bundle, not from the heirloom collection, and showed her how to make small, even stitches. She asked if quilts could belong to one person and still tell stories to many people. I said, that is exactly what a good loan does. The brass key changed after that. For years, it had been a private grief object, something I kept in a drawer and touched on days when I missed my mother's voice. After the fundraiser, it became proof. After the corrected exhibit, it became a symbol I could share without giving it away. I used its shape as the logo for Brooks Heirloom Archive, the small preservation service I opened for families trying to document textiles, letters, photos, recipe books, military uniforms, church banners, and fragile things relatives like to call common property once the careful person dies. My first workshop was free. I called it Every Stitch Remembers. On the front table, I placed a sample provenance card, a storage receipt template, a donation deed checklist, a museum loan agreement, and a warning sheet titled, "Do not sign memory away at a family event." 22 people came. 17 were women. 3 brought quilt blocks. 1 brought a box of letters her brother had tried to donate for a tax receipt. We built her inventory before she left. I also created a checklist for daughters, widows, nieces, stepchildren, and caretakers who become the quiet keepers of family objects. Photograph everything, document maker and ownership, preserve storage receipts, use written loans, check museum deed language, keep insurance current, never accept family representative as a substitute for legal authority, and do not let anyone call protection selfish just because they wanted access. It spread through genealogy groups and small museums faster than I expected. Celeste invited me to give a public talk at the museum about provenance and domestic art. I stood beside Mom's blue sawtooth star quilt, under the correct label, and told a room full of strangers that women's work has always needed witnesses because families are very good at eating the labor and praising the loudest man at the table. Nobody clapped right away. Good. Some truths need a breath before applause. Tyler eventually sent a real apology. It took 8 months, and, I suspect, Nora refusing to speak to him about the quilts until he did. He admitted he wanted to look like the son who saved something. He admitted he did not understand what preservation cost because I had paid that cost out of sight. He did not fully admit the forgery was theft until I used the word and waited. Then he said, yes. I did not forgive him in a way that reopened access. I accepted that the sentence had finally entered the room. Madison never apologized. Her museum board hopes died quietly, which suited them. Karen still says I embarrassed the family in front of donors. I tell her she should be grateful I did not embarrass them in court. Dad and I speak carefully now. Careful is not warm, but it is better than false. The quilts are safe. Not hidden. Safe. Some rotate through the museum on limited loan. Some rest in archival boxes. The cedar chest itself is in my home, repaired, cleaned, and no longer treated like a magical container everyone can claim. The brass key hangs beside my desk, tied to the blue ribbon, above a framed copy of Mom's gift letter and Nora's activity sheet. Every stitch remembers. Aunt Amelia saved them. Those 2 sentences hold more truth than every speech Karen ever gave. My family invited me to the fundraiser as the daughter who abandoned my mother's quilts because I did not hand them over for their performance. They called storage abandonment. They called invoices obsession. They called conservation selfishness. They called a forged deed generosity. But the curator asked one clean question, and the whole story unraveled. Who signed the donation deed? Not Tyler, not Madison, not Karen, not the family representative they invented when ownership got in the way. My mother gave me the quilts because she knew love sometimes looks like cotton gloves, monthly receipts, and saying no to people who want beauty without responsibility. I did not abandon her legacy. I kept it from becoming their costume. So tell me, if your family stole the one thing your mother trusted you to protect and called you selfish for objecting, would you stay quiet in front of donors? And if the forged deed was hanging beside everything you saved, would you let them keep the applause or open the folder and let every stitch remember?